belonging within their peer group. So that is one of the things that I'm hoping to develop for that high tier. As we develop school-wide enrichment and personalized learning more, I think there will be a much wider suite. So it kind of depends on like the grade level and not necessarily between schools, but it might look a little bit different. So for example, our immersion programming looks different at different schools. So depending on where a student has exceptionality, they might have different options at their building. And then at our senior high, of course, we have all of our honors, advanced placement, and CIS courses. So that's a bit of a wider suite in terms of like PSEO access. There's a lot of options both within the building and connected to the building. So I think in terms of a suite, as I'm like picturing that sort of menu, is stronger in some areas than others. So I'd love any board recommendations on like what is missing from the suite that you see as a board or that families see that they think all students should have access to that might specifically benefit their student.
Thank you.
I found it really interesting when you were talking about the research you did on international models and just ways that other cultures define giftedness. Wondering what you saw in terms of intersection between social emotional learning and gifted and talented programming, such as it is in other countries.
In terms of what's offered, that varies quite a bit, but there is a consensus on some traits, such as like perfectionism, the extent of self-directedness can vary a lot. That sort of peer conflict. So students who are identified as gifted are typically have an intensity, and sometimes that intensity just like is in conflict with their peers, where they might not understand each other, or their peers aren't interested in the thing that they're so passionate about. And even as I'm saying that, you can see where there might be some overlap with students who are neurologically diverse. So sometimes those traits can overlap or be misidentified as special education instead of giftedness. So that does seem to have some consensus globally. There isn't a great framework that I found that has said, like, you should do this to address that, but there are books and trainings that we could offer our staff to at least raise awareness so that they're looking for this and they can counsel students who are struggling because of that.
Thank you. You referenced policy 513 at the beginning of your presentation. Wondering if you have some specific policy recommendations for our monitoring committee to consider, or if at this point, you know, the goal of this workshop was just to like lay that foundation and then we could go deeper into specifics in committee. When I say we, it's just because I'm jealous that I'm not on the monitoring committee, so I'm just.
One of the goals with some of the edits that were suggested was to broaden the definition so that it could provide more flexibility with our programming. And I know that there's a tension between wanting clarity and flexibility. So that's, I don't know if that's a recommendation, but something to consider as you're making the policy. And perhaps it might be useful to consider like guidelines if you want greater clarity so that we have those guidelines to work with within our programming, but maybe they're not like part of the policy itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty common practice for us that we wouldn't include it in the policy language, but it would be kind of an addendum. Is part of the dynamic too that this model is currently in evolution, so we wouldn't want to put something in policy that would restrict what IDL is trying to do with the programming. Is that a piece of it?
Yes, absolutely. And like I mentioned at the beginning, I think we're really open to board input on the programming. If there are strong feelings or expertise or personal experiences that you bring, and it might be better served as we consider and develop programming than in policy.
Thank you. Yes.
Allegra, I've been thinking a lot about how public school systems got to the place where we are now. It's a very common place. And perhaps about the role that the grammar of schooling played in helping us or in shaping where we are now. For example, the rigidity with grade levels and cohorts of students who matriculate year after year only because they're the same age, but not really anything else, and standards that dictate that students have to be at a specific place at a specific grade level, right? And I'm just wondering, as we think about how we might shape this policy, what is it that we as a system and the people in it will have to unlearn in order to truly shape a policy which shapes programs that is based on what we should have learned or known to begin with. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I think it's helpful to look at the MDE requirements as sort of like the guide rails, if you will, but then push on them as hard as possible. I want us to meet state statute and make sure that we're providing the education that will reach every student's needs. And we're finding that in our multi-age programming, particularly in math, students are in very different places, and they're going much faster in some cases than they ever have before, even with our traditional gifted math option. So we are really pushing so many boundaries, like grade levels. And that's exactly why I think keep those programs in mind as we work on this policy, because we don't want to limit opportunities like that are actually taking the roof off of the limits of what students can do. And I think sometimes we box ourselves in with good intentions. So for example, one of the language changes was student-centered program design versus acceleration, so that it's more inclusive of where students are. I mentioned earlier, even gifted students are not homogeneous, so they might have exceptionality in one area and not another, and so does that mean that they can't accelerate anywhere or in only one area, and who gets it and who doesn't? Where student-centered kind of opens it up to well, if Jen is our student, what needs does she have? Where can we really let her soar? Where does she need a little more support? And let's not define it too strictly, because it might be different than Shannon or Tanya.
I need much more support than Shannon, just generally speaking. But question for you, as you interact with your teaching and learning colleagues, innovation design and learning colleagues in other districts, are there other districts in Minnesota that are doing this type of really deep and holistic work around rethinking gifted and talented services and offerings, or are we leading the charge is what I'm trying to say.
I would say of the hundreds of districts, we're probably in the top 5. So typically, when I start talking about the programming we're offering, people are like, oh, wow, like if you can make that happen, that's going to be so great. So it's been challenging as I try to connect with other leaders, specifically in like GT or school-wide enrichment. I would say that in most cases we are leading. We have at least one neighbor, St. Louis Park, has school-wide enrichment. So I would say they're in the metro area, probably the leader in terms of that really inclusive language and programming.
Thinking about additional needs, so we need policy change, we need professional development. What else are the needs that you've identified at this point in order to take us to the next level?
I think work around mindset with our community, with our leaders, with our staff. And I think that mindset can only be developed with some experience and some learning as well. So providing opportunities to see what it looks like in classrooms when these structures are put in place. So I was thrilled to see the Royal Report really featured Meadowbrook school-wide enrichment model. We've done a open house at Alice Smith on personalized math, and families that attended that walked away feeling like they really understood what we were trying to do. So I think creating those opportunities for families to see it, experience it, really helps with our messaging that we're not trying to get rid of anything, we're trying to expand it and have it be for all kids.
Yeah, as I move through the community and talk to parents and caregivers and think about my own experience as a parent, really seeing this programming in action is so powerful. I think sometimes people join us via the live stream and they listen to these conversations at the board table, which can be riveting, but sometimes are not. And it's just so much more powerful to see those things in action and our talented educators making it happen, taking risks, and just the acknowledgement that, as Dr. Mary Perry Reed said, as we have all been conditioned by our educational experiences. I've been conditioned to teach a certain way and have had to uncondition myself to be able to teach a different way, right? And that's really hard and can feel really scary for educators who oftentimes have that perfectionist mindset. And so just thinking about how powerful that work is at the classroom level and those decisions that our teachers are making every day, I have a lot of respect for that.
Absolutely, and it's really exciting to see when a teacher takes a risk in their classroom and it's wonderful and it goes, or it's a failure, but they learn something from it and that knowledge spreads among their peers. Like, that's the most effective way for us to build capacity is by connecting teachers with each other, having time to collaborate and learn from each other the amazing work that they're doing.
Thank you. Anything else for Allegra while we're lucky enough to have her here?
No, just thank you for this work.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Allegra.
Thank you, Allegra.
It's great to see you. Our next agenda item is our fiscal year 2022-2023 budget update. We will welcome Director Chapanduka to the table. And while he is joining us, I'll turn it over to Dr. Mary Perry Reed.
Well, thank you, Chair Bouchard, and welcome, Director Chapanduka. So we are, I believe, at the second to the last board meeting, and so in anticipation of our school board's acceptance of the fiscal year 23 budget, we'd like to take this time to re-highlight for school board members some of the important budgeting pieces that Director Chapanduka has shared with you before, as well as ensure our board is made aware of any changes that may inform the final budget. Mostly, we're in a positive place. However, I do have to say that it was very disappointing for all education leaders that our state legislature was unable to agree on support for public education, especially because it could have assisted school districts with their special education cross subsidies. So I'm not sure what will happen then in the next few weeks regarding a special session and state support. But in terms of our district budget, thanks to Teruro's hard work and his team's hard work, we are in mostly a positive place. So I'll turn it over to Director Chapanduka. And I don't think, Teruro, we have the monitors working yet, but hopefully all board members will be able to follow the link. So go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mary Reid. Good evening, Chair Bouchard. Good evening, respectful board members. My voice may sound a bit cracked up because I was not feeling well for the last couple of days, so this is my first day in the last week back to work. I did share my presentation with Alice to share with the board, so yeah. I'm hoping she did share that stuff with you guys. And the majority of the information will be presenting here. The board already know it. Some of the community members already know. There's been some changes, and there will still be some changes. Our hope is that today we'll do the first read, and then the board will approve the budget at our next board meeting, which is on June 7. As has been alluded by the superintendent, we are in a healthy space, but there's also been some challenges when you start to look at departments like special services, which is required to maintain maintenance of effort. At the same time, due to the pandemic, there's been an increased need of mental health support without any additional funding coming into the system. So we've been working with Director Contreras and their team to identify mitigating measures we can put in place so that our students who are in need of services get the services at the most optimal level, and we address some of the challenges and the needs within our different spaces. As has been discussed in the past, when we started developing the fiscal year 23 budget, we did look into our Vision 2031. We did try to identify certain priorities, we did try to identify certain priorities which aligned to the board's vision, the superintendent's vision, the community's vision, and out of those priorities, we came up with top 3 priorities and our instructional components, and these included restorative practices and wellness, training adults for change, personalized learning. We also did break some of our priorities under operational needs, and some of the feedback we got from district leadership and staff centered around making decision, which are centered within data platforms. And we've been working with our data scientists and our data teams to start building those systems so that going into the future, our decisions are more defined by the data we are collecting and how that data is being used in our buildings, in our departments, to align ourselves with Vision 2031. One of the things we also did take a look at include encouraging financial decisions to be made at the local level. So when we start to look at our allocations, you'll find out that those allocations have been broken down based on the predictable staffing model 2.0 and some of the flexible dollars we are giving to buildings. And those dollars are used based on the building's priorities and needs, which may be unique in different spaces. But that creates that entrepreneurship, that creates that level of accountability for our building leaders, just making sure that their decisions are aligned with district strategic goals. We are also building platforms, just making sure that our resources are allocated transparently. There's consultation with our community, and there's an understanding across our system on how those resources are being used. Our goal as part of that data building component is to make sure that we link our budget clearly to the programs and the results which are delivered through our learning programs. So when we start to look at fiscal year 22-23 from an allocation perspective, these are the components we used to build the fiscal year 22-23 budget. One, we did refine our predictable staffing model, which is the best allocation. We looked at some of our ratios, our formulas, our ranges, and refined based on some of the stuff which didn't really work this current year, and also feedback we received from different parts of our system. We also factored in a 2% state revenue increase, which brings our basic pay student allocation to 6,863 from 6,728 as of fiscal year 22. We also factored in a 3% cost of living adjustment, a 3% increase in our fringe benefits, a 7% increase in our purchase services and supplies, a 5% increase in our utilities and energy. And these components were factored in after consultation with our Citizen Financial Advisory Committee, which also presented in February to the board. And again, as we start to look at our consumer price index and inflation, it has been going up and down. I just checked the years of the last reporting based on the Department of Labor statistics. It's sitting at about 8.3. When we build the budget, it's 7%. So you can just start to see that things are shifting, and we don't know when this is going to stop. When you start to look at things like energy, fuel, that's about 35 to 40% increase. And we are factoring in a 5%, so we'll keep our fingers crossed, and hopefully we'll start to see some shifting and adjustment across, the different economies of scales. We also built into the formula how we are allocating some of the categorical dollars, which are part of the discretionary funds going into our buildings, so that buildings have priorities on how those resources are being used. Some of the resources actually come tied up with guidance from the state on how those dollars can be used, either to close the achievement gap or to address some of the integration needs within our system. We also allocated resources to cover supplies and some of the instructional needs at each site, and those are at the discretion of the building leaders on how those resources are being used. Well, when we did the initial preliminary budget presentation to the board, there are certain components we had not factored into the budget. So some of the ESSA dollars had not been factored at that point in time. We did get some more resources from the state to cover up some of our summer programs. So those pieces have been factored into the presentation today. So if you start to see different numbers, which are not tallying with what was presented to the board at our previous meeting, it's because information is coming to us and is changing on a weekly basis. So as I get that information, I try to go and update our allocations. As you all know, enrollment drives revenue into the district. Enrollment drives our resources are allocated across our system. So our starting point when you start to look at the budget is enrollment projections. And the numbers we use usually start with our allocations which are coming into the district based on what we've seen when it comes to trends over time. And this is based on October 1 numbers. But on a monthly basis, starting in October, we start to review and analyze our numbers, try to be very conservative when it comes to how we are allocating resources, because we are actually using projections into the future without knowing how those numbers will actually come up when we start to get the actual enrollment into our building. So if we end up overinflating and give allocations and then end up with less numbers, that's dangerous to the district. So we try to be very conservative when we look at our projected numbers, when we calculate the resources into our system. We have had a slight increase. I've also checked in with surrounding school districts, and there's also been a spike across the system when it comes to kindergarten, especially in the West Metro areas. We have had the same situation at Hopkins, but when you just look at our overall enrollment trends into the future, you can just see that our foreseeable projections are flat. So we just have to be very cognizant of that, and also make sure that we allocate our resources from a conservative standpoint, not knowing whether we'll ever get any other additional allocations like we did with some of the Ks and ESSA dollars. So I'll start with our overall. When we look at all the different funds which are coming into the system, so for fiscal year 22-23, we are anticipating about $163.9 million. This means that our general fund, which accounts for the majority of our district resources, it accounts for about 69%, which is $113 million. 3% is accounted for in food services, which is about $4.1 million. 6% is accounted for in community education programs, which is about $9.3 million. 10% is accounted for our debt service, which pays in our construction projects and some of our long-term facility maintenance. That accounts for about $16.2 million. Construction accounts for about 13% or $21.1 million. And you'll hear more about our construction project through our presentation tonight with the long-term facility maintenance. So our total, all funds sits at about $163.9 million across our different programs and proprietary funds. So when we start to look at our general fund is actually broken down into a number of different categories. A lot of these categories are formula-based. Most of them are calculated at the state level. And some of these funds are categorical, meaning that they should be used for specific needs. Either the calculation is based either on free and reduced lunches, or it's based on other components as determined by the state. So we have different categories. We have compensatory aid, we have achievement and integration, we have English learners, we have gifted and talent, of which part of the presentation was just done by Allegra here. We have special education, we have extended learning, we have state and local grants, we have federal programs, we have our referendum, we have our career and technical education aid, and our Safe Schools levy. So all these components are all lumped together to give you a summary of what you guys see at the end, but these are very complicated formulas, and we have so many spreadsheets. We have to pull this information so that it really makes sense to our community. So when I start breaking down the different revenue categories, just like I said, our referendum accounts for about 12.3%. Or 13.8. This referendum, this is what the voters actually voted for the district. In our last referendum was in 2017. About 5.1% or $5.8 million is location equity. Actually, this is voted in by the board. It doesn't have to go to the community. We have about $11.6 million or 10.3%, which is our capital projects levy. Again, this is also voted by the community. 1.3 or 1.2% or $1.3 million is our integration aid, is calculated by the state. $3 million or 2.7 8.5% or $9.6 million is our special education. So the special education component is what we are receiving. The difference, our special education, just the state component is about $14.7 million. So the difference is accounted for in our regular general education as a cross subsidy.
Excuse me, Director Chepanduka, what is the amount of our cross subsidy for next year?
About $5 million.
Okay.
So when you start to factor in the 9.6 plus that $5 million, takes us to about $14.6 million, which is about 65% funds coming from the state, 35% the cross subsidy for the district.
Thank you.
You're welcome. $6.6 million or 5.9% is our federal grants, and that also includes the one-time ESSA funds, which definitely will be going away as you start to see when we go into fiscal year 24. 409,000 or 0.4 is our extended time. The rest, which is about 53.2%, is the non-categorical revenue, which is just the other general aid which we can use for the different programs the district has. If you add all those together, it gives us a total of about $113 million. And if you compare to my last presentation, I think it was sitting about $111 million. So I added about $1.2 million, which was the summer grant we just received. But those dollars have to be used this summer, and they have to be used by September 30th of 2022. So we've been working diligently hard to make sure that these dollars are used for the benefit of the district, and we're able to use them and not lose them. And on the expenditures, 58% of our district expenditures are salaries and wages. So about $65 million covers our salaries and wages. 23%, that's our benefits, about $26 million. So if you add the two, about 82% of our total expenditures are people, because we save people. 13%, about $15.1 million, is purchase services. This accounts for some of our contracted services, some of the contracts with our bus company all are accounted within the purchase services. 2.9 million or 3% supplies, 1% or $1.5 million other expenses or other transfers which don't fit in within the different categories based on our Uniform Financial Accounting Reporting Standards. 2.2 million or 2% is our capital expenditures. If you add all those components together, gives us our $113,042,523, meaning that our projected general fund revenue, $130,042,523, and our projected general fund expenditures of $132,042,523 gives us a structurally balanced budget for fiscal year 23. So when I start to break down our general fund, which is our main operating fund, what I wanted to make sure the board understands and the community understands is how these dollars are being distributed across our system. So I did a breakdown of what is allocated directly into our buildings, what is allocated to departments who are supporting our buildings and our operations, and what is allocated to district-wide programs, which are programs which are either sitting in a building but controlled at the central level. So when I do that breakdown, 67% of our budget is going directly into our buildings, which is about $75.3 million. 6%, or about $6.7 million, department allocations. So these are things like human resources, business services, to account for the finances, the accounting, our governance and management, which include the superintendent's office and the board. All those sit within the department allocations. Our IDL, our special services central office. 30.9 million or 27% is district-wide allocations. District-wide allocations include things like our insurance, our workers' compensation, our transportation department, our operations and maintenance, our custodians budgeted at the central level, but they are all sitting in the buildings. So in totality, about 94% of all the resources coming into the district are actually sitting in our buildings. So that's the breakdown I have for that within the general fund. The next component is our proprietary funds, which are food services and community education. So for food services for fiscal year 23, we are projecting our revenue to be $4,126,378. We are projecting our expenditures to be $4,113,000. $384, leaving a surplus of about $12,994. At this point in time, we don't have all the information when it comes to food services, since in the last 2 years, we've been using the summer food service program, which was a 100% reimbursement. And I've been talking to Director Mikura, the food services supervisor, in regards to what are we anticipating as far as us moving back to the National School Lunch Program, or still being on the school summer food service program. And my understanding, there's been some push at the legislature level to see if we can continue with the program, but I don't think anything has been set stone on how that looks like. So right now we're just anticipating that we are budgeting both ways, that we might be going with the National School Lunch Program, or if the legislature comes back and says otherwise, we can still pivot back and continue with the program as we've done in the last 2 years. For community education, our projected revenue, we are anticipating projected revenue of $9,360,254. We are projecting our expenditures at $8,434,795, leaving the district with a surplus of about $925,459. And as you know, community aid, when the pandemic started, was in a very precarious position when it comes to their fund balance, but they've been able to adjust their programs to where their fund balance is now very healthy, and it can sustain itself going into the future. The other factors we have kind of putting into consideration when it comes to the fiscal year 23 budget, not knowing where the pandemic will take us. I mean, I think we've been, reading the news. There's a spike, and we don't know what that looks like, when it comes to the health services in our buildings, when it comes to some of the mental health challenges we may be facing going into fiscal year 23. There are also some economic ramifications, as I just mentioned, with inflation and the uncertainty of not knowing where, some of the world's conditions will take us, and what that impact is, with fuel and food supplies. So there's some uncertainty and not knowing if we'll get any additional resources. So we just have to be very conservative on how we are using our resources in case we end up in a situation we've had in the past. Student enrollment is stable, but we are anticipating it to remain flat for the foreseeable future. Legislative biennium, as you all know, that everything is on the table. Nothing has been concluded, so we don't know what will happen beyond fiscal year 23 when it comes to inflationary increases, or when it comes to the state provide additional funding for special programs like special services. We'll keep monitoring the inflationary components, like I said, and see if there's any necessary adjustments which we'll need to make, whether we freeze, certain spendings, depending with how the consumer price index play against what we have. I know for certain that we've been checking, a number of, like, for example, food items. I mean, they've gone way up. Bread has gone up like 25%. Based on some of the information we are getting from our vendors. Milk, 25%. So those are things which are playing negatively against us at this point in time. So we'll just be monitoring everything and come back to the board if there's any additional changes which needs to be made. With that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much, Director Chapanduka, and for community members who are watching and our newest board colleagues, we're so happy to have with us. It's this process of continuously refining the budget as we move closer to approval in June, and really appreciate you being here with us tonight to explain where we are today in terms of the information we have, which, as you mentioned, changes daily. Yeah. Appreciate you pointing out some of these inflationary components that really put a strain on our budget. And of course, if our public school funding was tied to inflation, as are so many other funding streams in our state, then we would have a better understanding. We'd be able to control better for some of these factors, but of course, it is not. It's really at the whim of legislators. So thankful for all the work that you've done here, and wondering if my board colleagues have any comments or questions.
Chair Bouchard.
Yes, Director Adams.
Yes, I've got a question regarding compensatory funding. I see that you're projecting we're going to get about $3 million in revenue from compensatory next year. Compensatory is tied specifically to applications for free and reduced lunch, which have been down during the pandemic because parents didn't have to fill that out to get a free lunch. How much has that affected our revenue for compensatory in the district?
Sure. Thank you for that question, Director Adams. Yes, you are very right. Compensatory is tied to our free and reduced lunches. When you start to look at, the current structure of how we are getting funding for our food services, which is, the summer food service programs, it kind of puts a damper on us getting those applications in. So if I go back to fiscal year 20, which is probably the most recent healthier year, our compensatory was about $3.6 million. And then we've pushed into fiscal year 21, fiscal year 22. It went down to about $2.8 million. So now it has just gone up by about $200,000 to that $3 million we have.
Well, I know that the legislature is, I don't know if it made it into any bill that passed, but I know they're looking at alternative ways to calculate compensatory revenue for school districts because of the whole uncertainty regarding the free and reduced lunch applications. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Based on a resolution, too, that Hopkins School Board brought to the MSBA Delegate Assembly,
Right.
we need a more accurate and less burdensome way to calculate educational benefit funding than requiring parents to fill out an application. I am also wondering about, I know that you said that you're working on 2 different budgets based on what it happens around food service and our school nutrition department. Do you have an idea of what the impact of not fully funding school nutrition programs might have on our budget? Is there kind of a ballpark?
Sure. I mean, I can't give you like specific numbers, but then when we start to look at, for example, when you look at our current summer food service program, claim process, which is based on participation, with how many students are participating and we get those funds back into the system. If we go back to the National School Lunch Program, meaning that all those students who are on the paid have to pay, those who are on the reduced have to pay a certain dollar amount, that might have an impact. Because now we are looking at, one, we have to increase our food prices because of what I just told you with 20% bread, 20-25% milk and everything else, which might mean that there's less participation from our scholars who may probably not, afford it, and that might definitely have a reduction in providing those services to our scholars. Obviously, considering that the last time we actually had a National School Lunch Program claim process in place was, just before the pandemic started, and then the pandemic kicked in. We'll just have to look at what participation looks like if we end up going back to the paid, free or reduced. But definitely, there's going to be an impact on there.
Great. That would also be another benefit of fully funded school nutrition programs, is that we could keep supply chains more stable and not have to rely so much on fair market value, per se. So anyway, lots of great outcomes if that bill was passed in the state legislature. Thank you.
Chair Bouchard.
Yes, Director Adams.
One more comment here. I had the Star Tribune website up, and at 3:22 this afternoon, they released a statement from a law judge that was made that said that all customers for natural gas in Minnesota will bear the full responsibility of $660 million in charges for the February 2021 storm that raised all the prices all of a sudden. And customers had no option but to pay them. And the judge ruled that the customers will bear the full burden. None of it will be shared by CenterPoint Energy or any other energy company. So we've got that to look forward to.
We just can't catch a break.
No.
Good thing we have those solar panels.
Right.
This is true. Look at Director Newman smiling back there, thinking about the solar panels.
Yeah, and actually the solar came right on time. So right now we're just finishing up the inspection in the panels at the high school. And then we'll finish up at West Junior High. So we are hoping that that will be a huge cost saving to the district.
Yes.
On top of the solar gardens we already are subscribing to.
Good.
Thank you.
Additional questions or comments for Director Chapanduka? Thank you very much. We'll look forward to seeing you back at the board table during the meeting.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Turo.
Thank you.
So our final agenda item for the workshop is a discussion around our board goals for this year. At our next meeting, I'll bring forward an update for our community regarding our board goal attainment for this year. We set our board goals at the beginning of each school year, typically at our board retreat in August. And so these were board goals that we agreed upon at our board retreat last August. Of course, we had new board members join us in the interim who came on and helped us attain these 4 goals. We aligned our goal areas with our system-wide goal areas. So you'll see if you're looking at the board goals, which can be found on the school board website, kind of near the bottom, there's a tab for board goals. You'll see in parentheses how we've aligned these board goals to system-wide goal areas that all of our leaders are working on, so that we're working on these in concert with what our cabinet level and building level leaders are concentrating on as well. So looking for some input from my board colleagues on what you want me to say at the next meeting. No.
We've met all of our goals.
Yes, right. Should I just say that?
Yeah.
100% A+. We've done great. Hoping for a bit more nuance than that as we talk through these. So goal area number 1, which has been a priority for several board members for a couple of years here, and we turned it into a goal area this year to really be able to get some good work done around calendar and schedule equity. So happy to have Oscar here tonight, who was a key player in getting some of this work done this year. So under each goal, we have the key actions and then the measurable impact. I think for the statement at the next meeting, I'll focus on the measurable impact, if that makes sense to the board. And as we talk through this, if there are aspects of these goal areas where we fell short, we can use that to inform our goal setting process in August for next year. So looking at the measurable impact for goal area 1, The board will hear and vote on the administration's recommendations on calendar and schedule equity and direct the administration to implement these changes. This happened during our calendar discussion earlier this year. We're striving to make our calendar more inclusive and equitable. Some notable changes this year is we included more Jewish and Muslim holidays in our calendar. Looking at this idea of schedule equity, building in more time for students to engage in activities that interest them, receive support in areas where they need it, thinking about the Friday late starts and all of the work that's been done around those. Wondering if my board colleagues have anything to add just under that first measurable impact bullet. And Oscar, of course, you as well.
Chair Bouchard.
Yes.
Well, I'd just like to say I certainly think the board accomplished this goal, at least in the regard to religious equity. I think it's more complicated with things like the late starts on Fridays. It's hard to tell how many people really use them. There's certainly times if someone is falling behind, I think that they definitely get used then, but I don't know how much people are using those late starts to just do more stuff. I think it really is just used to catch up on stuff, at least from what I've seen. But in regards to calendar equity with religious holidays, I think it's certainly a success in that regard.
Yeah.
Thank you, Oscar.
Chair Bouchard?
Yes.
Just two things for the board's awareness. One, we did survey our secondary students, families, and staff, so we can share with you the trends and patterns from those survey results. They were very mixed. Lots of students, parents, and staff appreciated the flexibility and the time and the opportunity to decide how to use that time. And there were students, staff, and families who preferred sort of the traditional, let's all start at the same time approach, which is, brings me to my second point, which is most likely what we are doing for next year, because we will have a later start time at all of our secondary schools, and just given not wanting to increase transportation costs, we did find it difficult to figure out how we could continue a late start opportunity without increasing transportation costs, and all students would be able to start at a later time. So currently, it's a non-issue. However, looking at the feedback is really important for us because we still have to continue to think about how to provide flexible, self-directed learning opportunities into the school day as well as before and after, those start and end bells.
Thank you. And you brought up another component of our calendar and schedule equity work, which was the change in start times and, the grade configuration conversation that went along with that, so.
Chair Bouchard.
Yes.
If I can add on to what Dr. Mary Perrier was saying, I think even if we don't have those Friday mornings to have more flexible work time, it's my understanding that we will still have opportunity hour at the high school. And I think as it was like explained to us in the beginning of the year, it was supposed to be like where you could work specifically with your teachers and do more stuff that's not necessarily in the strict curriculum. And in that regard, I don't know how much it did because you don't always have the same opportunity hour as your teacher, but there is still flexibility in that time. If you have work that you need to get done, that is like a block in the day where you can sort of do whatever you want. So even if we don't have those Friday mornings, opportunity hours do definitely still provide some flexibility.
That's a great point. And there are some technical things we can do to tighten up the whole opportunity hour structure and experience to continue to add value for for the lived student experience.
Excellent, thank you. Monitoring committee, did we make any policy changes to support calendar and schedule equity implementation, or did we have to? Like, did that become a thing that we had to do?
I don't think so. It was more around statute and the number of days and then
Right.
going towards the calendar, but I don't think there was any policy changes that we made.
Yeah, I think that our school board policies are constrained by state statute. I think there are lots of changes we would like to make that impact the calendar, and also kind of like how we do school. You know, like the Carnegie units and that sort of stuff, but that's not in our power to change.
So we went as far as we possibly could, given the power that we have in terms of our
Yes.
policies.
On this particular issue,
Right,
I would say so.
thank you. Anything else on goal area 1? Okay, so we'll move into goal area 2, our Vision 2031 aligned budget. We just heard a budget update from Director Chapanduka that reminds us of all of the work that his team has done and that we've done at this board table this year. So taking a look at measurable impact, the board will create more opportunities for community members to learn about and engage with the budgeting process. This will lead to greater community understanding about public education funding and our budgeting process in Hopkins. I see this as a growth area, perhaps a component that we could carry forward into our goal setting in August. Wanted to get your thoughts on that. Been struggling too with, like, what's the best way or the most effective way or ways, plural, to engage community members around budgeting? Like, what type of structure do we need to set up, right? Like, obviously, we have these excellent reports at our workshops and meetings. That's a chance for the community to hear, you know, how this process moves along between January and June. But thinking about, like, what's an engaging entry point for people? We've done kind of School Finance 101, Hopkins Public Schools Budget 101 sessions that I think are a good foundation. But thinking about, like, what are the most interesting entry points? You know, maybe like a conversation around nutrition funding for people who are passionate about that, and then linking it to advocacy opportunities or an advocacy training. Because so much of what we talk about here is, you know, we want to maintain this abundance mindset, but we are experiencing shortages. And so I've been thinking too about how we can combine, like, knowledge building with training around how to advocate for, you know, closing these gaps. So I'm probably already getting into our goal-setting conversation that we should start in August, but I just wanted to get that out there while I was thinking about it.
Well, are constituents clamoring for this? You know, I know how hard it is for me to recruit people to serve on CFAC, and I just wonder, you know, is there really a demand out there for more input into the budgeting process?
I think it depends on who you talk to, and part of it is just a function of awareness too.
Yeah.
You know, that some community members have more knowledge around school finance than others, and like, how do we create more equitable opportunities for engagement is kind of where my head was at, but I definitely understand the question.
Chair Bouchard?
Yes.
I think that of all of our stakeholders, our students are the most engaging.
Yes.
And like, we all love to listen to students, but we don't all love to listen to each other as adults. So what if, so in my board report, we have 4 students at the high school who like did really well in a national finance competition. Like, what if we, through Royal Reps or Royal Connections, what if we paid students to study, like we could have a couple of students intern at the business office, Director Chapanduka. Or,
Just nodding.
he said, oh, sure, one more thing. But our students could study Minnesota school finance, and then we could pay them to create and record and produce 2-minute videos on very narrowly focused topics designed to increase knowledge and understanding about how public schools are financed. And yeah, students would do a great job, adults would listen because these videos would be interesting, and they could meet our students and see how smart they are.
Yeah,
I think there'd be a lot of advantages to that.
I like that a lot.
Whenever we want to do something, we have to think about how students can help us, because they always know how to do it well and interesting, and some of them have the capacity that, you know, we as adults, we just have so much going on. What do you think, Oscar?
I think it's a really great idea. It's definitely, it's hard because this is an issue that I think all students should care about, but it's hard to get kids excited about budgeting. If
That's
we're
why I
being
said
realistic.
a paid opportunity.
Yeah, that's true.
Everybody
That's
likes
true.
money.
I do think it's a great idea. I was just participating in DECA, which I'm not sure if that's the competition you're referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in that group, that's a lot of very business-minded students who I think there's definitely interest within that group. But I think it could go further than that too, because it's real. Like DECA is mostly role-playing, honestly. It's practicing business, but it's not necessarily stuff that really affects the world. But giving students an opportunity to see how this really works, I think it would be great. I mean, I personally had no idea how any of this worked. If you had asked me how much money Hopkins spends in a year, not the slightest clue until this position, really. So I think it would be a really great position for those students who are interested.
I think too, for our candidate, our legislative breakfast, we had students make 2 videos around big advocacy pushes that we were going to do this year at the state legislature. One was around school nutrition, and one was around mental health. And those were deeply impactful, I thought. Well done by the students. Thank you, Oscar. And I think that it's a great tool to get the message out there. These things directly impact our students, so they're passionate about talking about it. I mean, they're in the classroom. If we don't get funding, that impacts your classroom directly. So I love that.
Absolutely, and as one of the students who made the videos, those videos ended up getting other students involved too. It was only a few of us. It was only a few student board reps and one non-student board rep who was making the videos, but we were interviewing other students to get their opinions on it. So it sort of spread throughout the school, and other people ended up at least hearing about these issues, just because when a few students start doing something, it does spread.
That's fantastic, thank you. Really like all of those ideas. And that's a good transition into the second bullet point, which is actively engaging more community members in state and federal advocacy through the LAC. And so thinking about how we engaged more students in that process over the course of the year, and all of the opportunities for growth that we have moving forward, and continuing to explore some of these intersections between the financial realities, engaging students and understanding those, and helping us build our understanding of how that impacts students in the classroom, right? And then using that knowledge for advocacy. So this is exciting. And then the third bullet point is that the board will consider CFAC and our administration's recommendations and pass a structurally balanced budget aligned with Vision 2031. Thanks to Director Chapanduka, we are well on our way. That we will most likely do that at our next meeting. So feel comfortable with that one if you do. Anything else on goal area 2 before we move on? So I will be leaning on our monitoring committee members to help me with goal area 3 here. So equitable and restorative policy changes, looking at measurable impact. We have some specific policies listed out here. I think in addition to these policies, there were other new policies and some revised policies that certainly fall under this category. If it's hard to come up with all of them right now, Vice Chair Andreessen and I could work together so that I have all the policy numbers in front of me for the report next meeting, because I don't want to leave out any of the important work that the monitoring committee has done. But anything you would add at this point in addition to the policies that are listed in the goal area?
No, I mean, we can definitely give updates on the policies that were listed. I think it was helpful to have these front and center. I would just say that one of the things that really informed our work from January on was we used the equity audit as a guide. They listed out specific policies, one of which intersected with 506, which we had spelt out in our board goals. So I think we did shift when we got that audit report to follow more closely their recommendations. So I can definitely resubmit a list and then also give an update on the policies that are listed here. I think we had some wins, like this is a heavier lift than we thought it was going to be. And so just talking through that, but progress is definitely being made on all those in addition to what was listed in the equity audit.
Excellent, thank you. If you want to just take lead on goal area 3 at during that report at the next meeting, I think that would be perfect. Any other comments from our 2 other excellent monitoring committee members? Okay, goal area 4, new board member orientation and culture building. So it was an exciting year because we welcomed 2 new board members, and we had some action items, including really updating our onboarding process, creating this interactive guidebook that is iterative so that each time we have new board members, we can add to the guidebook, and it's a tool that can be agile and that we can keep building. So looking at measurable impact, all board members understand their role on the board and in the community. All board members understand our shared culture and practices, and all board members have the information they need to be successful and are supported in their professional development. So I think some of this happened during onboarding. We've also had some important conversations around our agendas and making sure that that all information is clear and accessible to all board members in our community, and continuing to communicate well as a team. So those are some of the things that came to mind for me, wondering if there is anything else that you'd like me to add in that area.
I think we also did board mentoring.
Thank you, yes.
It's an important piece, I think. Although the mentees might not think so.
Director Ross, what's your impression of where we're at here?
Yeah, I think we're in a good place. Obviously, it was like drinking from a fire hydrant, as like anybody would say. With all the moving pieces and trying to understand every nuance about what you can and cannot say, what you can and cannot do. So, I know a lot more versus January. So I feel definitely a lot more comfortable than I did January 1.
It's a lot. There's
And
nothing.
obviously Shannon was, very helpful to bounce ideas off as well. Or I shouldn't have said that, should I?
No, that's great.
We don't talk.
Yeah, there's nothing like that first board meeting. I just remember feeling like, what is happening? But it does get easier with time and with excellent mentors, right? Like Shannon and Steve, who stepped up to mentor our new board members. So thank you. Anything else you want to make sure that I include in the report at the next meeting? Okay, thank you so much for talking through this with me. It really is helpful, and we can end our workshop now, so we have a bit of a break, and looking forward to seeing you back at the table shortly before 7.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
refrigerator. Just half.
Just
This meeting of the Hopkins School Board is called to order at 7 PM. Our next agenda item is open agenda. This is the time when we typically take public comment from members of our community. There are two options for giving public comment before the school board. The first is to leave a voicemail, and that voicemail will be played during the public comment period. Or, of course, you can always join us in the boardroom, fill out a public comment card, and hand it to me before the meeting starts. There were no voicemails this evening, and we do not have anyone joining us in person. I did not receive a public comment card. So we will move on to our reports. We'll start with our student board representatives report. And Oscar, so great to have you here tonight. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Bouchard. You all don't need to worry. There's no long speech tonight on a systemic issue at the high school. It's just a few shorter, more uplifting updates. So most of the academic stuff for the year is finally starting to settle down. AP tests have already happened. Most finals have already happened, so most classes are really winding down. But there is still plenty of non-academic things happening at the high school right now. I'd first like to highlight something that's actually happening as we speak right now at the high school, which is Culture Night, which is, I would have loved to go, but I'm here. And there are students from all sorts of different cultures at the high school sharing performances, dances, foods, all sorts of things. So that should be really exciting, and I'm excited to hear about it after. We also had our presidential election for student council to elect our 2 presidents for next year. And it was today we found out the results, actually, and it is going to be myself and Abhinav Kumar. So that should be fun. Thank you. And this week is also quite busy with the lead up to prom. This week is Spirit Week, so we've got dress up days every day. Today was Tropical Day. Tomorrow is Everything But a Backpack Day Part 2, because it was such a hit the first time. We have a Pep Fest on Friday, the last Pep Fest of the year. And of course, prom itself is on Saturday. I'd also like to give a quick update on the mental health stuff that I was talking about last time. I'd like to thank Dr. Mary Perry Reed for setting up that group. And we did have an initial meeting to talk about how we're going to set this up, and I think that it should be happening soon, I hope. And because this is my last report of the year, in all likelihood, I would like to quickly address any students that might be watching. I don't really know where to look, but if you're a student watching right now and you are thinking about maybe applying for this position, you absolutely should do it. I did not really know what I was getting into when I applied to this. I thought it looked like a cool opportunity, but fast forward to now, I am working to make mental health more accessible to students at the high school. We no longer are going to have school on the holidays of religious minorities. This is a position where you really can make change happen. And I'd also like to thank every member of this board and our superintendent for truly listening to our student board representatives and actually taking action on what we have to say. And I'm really looking forward to working with you all over this next year. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. We're so privileged to have you at the table with us, and your work over this past year has been so impactful, and can't wait to continue it alongside you. For folks who were not tuning in at the last meeting when you did talk about student mental health, could you explain a little bit more about this group that's recently formed?
Yeah, so it's me, and I believe other students are beginning to be consulted as well. And it's essentially a group of all the people who are involved in providing support to students at the high school. We have some counselors, and then at other buildings, I believe, too, there's a whole list of titles. All those people who are involved in providing counseling, psychological support, social support, all of those people are involved, and the goal is really, for those who didn't hear last time, the goal is really to just make our resources more accessible to students and make it clearer what we have available.
Excellent, such important work. Thank you. Any other comments or questions for Oscar?
I have one question.
Absolutely.
Chair Bouchard.
Sure.
What is everything but a backpack day? What
Everything
does that involve?
It is, truthfully, it is one of my favorite days. It does possibly warrant a part two. It's exactly what it sounds like. Students can come to school carrying their books and laptop and whatever else in anything but a backpack. So for example, last time we did this, I came to school with a full baby stroller and I had my books piled up in the stroller. It was quite difficult on the stairs, but other than that, it was pretty fun.
All right.
And we had shopping carts
Oh, yeah.
and dog and kitty carriers, all kinds
We had
of
one
things.
student bring a fan. He stuck the book in the fan and just carried it around all day. People get pretty into anything but a backpack.
All right.
creative.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I just want to double check in the Google Meet, make sure there are no other student board reps with us tonight. I didn't see any names of student board reps. I see names in there. Great, thank you so much. And we will move to our superintendent's report with Dr. Mary Perry-Reed.
Well, thank you, Chair Bouchard, and good evening to board members and our student rep and colleagues in the audience, as well as community members who might be listening in. Thanks, Mr. Warner, for working on that live stream fix during the workshop. We appreciate it. So right before we started the board meeting this evening, we were all checking in with the national news. And I personally find it hard to begin with a Hopkins report when there is extreme tragedy happening in our national and international environments regarding the targeted killing of fellow citizens who happen to be of African descent in Buffalo. I want to just have us find a space to think about our thoughts and send a prayer. I drafted a personal reflection to help staff understand that when it comes to moving toward racial equity, we must be biased toward action. And a few staff shared that the message helped increase their racial lens, which is work that we all need to engage in so that we can have and demonstrate empathy during these situations, but not just empathy, really think about what we can do and do differently. Regarding what we are now hearing about an elementary school shooting in Texas, which is unimaginable, even if there are no casualties, it's impossible to understand the evil and the mental sickness that is influencing people's actions. So I propose that we take a very brief moment of silence to sympathize with the affected families and staff in Texas. Well, thank you for doing that, and I'm hoping that our teachers and principals will find the strength to support students tomorrow who I am confident will arrive at school, some with fear or feeling great confusion, being really at a loss for how to contemplate this world that we all live in. So we'll be checking in with our leaders tomorrow to make sure that they're offering teachers the right support. And I'm very thankful for our teachers who I know work very, very hard emotionally and cognitively to find the right words and facilitated activities to help students grapple during these times. So now I think we can move on to the report, and on a far, far lighter note, nobody's counting, but we do only have 7 days of school left. And this time is very full of retirement celebrations and staff gatherings at people's homes and even local breweries. Students are preparing for summer activities, and of course, our seniors are looking forward to heading to Mariucci next Thursday for our 2022 commencement services, which will begin at noon, Thursday, June 2nd. On this slide here, you'll see a photo of Alice Smith's second graders who went to Gibbs Farms to learn what life was like in the 1800s. We do have several of our elementary schools who send students to Gibbs Farms located in West St. Paul, and that's one of the favorite field trips amongst our Hopkins students. In the middle picture, you see our Meadowbrook principal, Natalie Sawatsky, who completed a 10K during student lunch, which was a treat for students if the school surpassed its $10,000 fundraising goal. So kudos to Natalie for, Natalie, Principal Sawatsky, runs every day. And I think she runs between, 3 and, Nick, do you know how far Natalie runs every day? Isn't it between like 3 and 7 miles every single day?
Wow.
Yeah, she's devoted. So it probably took her like 10 minutes to run that 10K. And then on the far right, you'll see 9th graders at North who are demonstrating their learning at the school-wide IB community event that we hold every year for freshmen. Next, I'd like to thank the Hmong Asian Club for for convening and offering a space for our Hmong students. This was a picture of some of the students after they held a fundraiser at North Junior High. Staff were able to purchase coffee, donuts, and wontons. And special shout out to Pa Nu Shong, our district's Hmong liaison, who does a great deal to mentor our Hmong students, work with Hmong families, and ensure that our students' culture is honored and respected. So that's the Hmong Asian Club. Back in, now I know we're revisiting this, but we didn't have this photo, and I wanted to share it not only with our board members, but our community. Back in January 2022, we were notified that the Hopkins School District and our school board was winning the Silver Magna Award, and this is an award given by the National School Board Association. And so in that photo, you see Director Hartland and Treasurer Adams, who traveled to the national conference and accepted the award on our behalf. And I mentioned earlier during the workshop when we were trying to figure out how we might build the knowledge within our community around Minnesota school finance. We have 4 incredible high school students, Sonia, Chloe, Zoe, and George, who represented Minnesota at the Personal Finance National Competition. There were 87 Minnesota teams that competed to be the team to represent Minnesota, and our students were recognized in the top 24. So that's a great accomplishment for that group. On May 9, professional athletes surprised our high schoolers with a visit during Pep Fest. Did you have fun at that, Oscar?
It was insane.
It was insane, okay. So the Gronkowski brothers challenged our girls basketball players to a 3-point shootout. And what we hear is that the Gronkowskis played valiantly, but in the end, they were no match for our Hopkins Royals. And then also on behalf of their foundation, the brothers donated $15,000 to support girls' athletics programs here in Hopkins. We're very thankful for their visit and also for their generous donation. Also wanted to share that last week we had a phenomenal inaugural event here in Hopkins titled the Black Male Summit, organized by our Gatewood principal, Dr. Nolan, our IDL literacy specialist, Keenan Jones, coordinator of diversity, equity, and inclusion, Dr. Brown, and our director of community education, Alex Fisher. So these four gentlemen spent many months organizing this Black Male Summit. 73 Black male students from Hopkins and also surrounding districts attended, and we heard that it was very powerful. And really the purpose of this event is to create a sense of community for Black boys of all ages, as well as empower our Black male students to see themselves as scholars and to really recognize the gifts and the power they have to change their personal environments and hopefully change the world. So our coordinators are looking forward to having the Black Male Summit be an annual experience. And then I will conclude with a focus on a system goal, and I'd like to share with our board, and you'll hear more in the August school board retreat. But with IDL's guidance, we are building a professional development framework that will also offer a scope and sequence for adult learning for school year 22-23. So we really want to be thoughtful about identifying the topics around personalized concept and inquiry-based learning, training adults for change, anti-racist behaviors and pedagogies, as well as wellness and restorative practices. These are all of the things that we as adults need to know and be able to do well in order to have our leadership actions and instructional pedagogies be aligned with our system goals, and in order to be racially equitable and racially just in our focus, in our work here in Hopkins. So I really appreciate the direction of our Director of IDL and Ertl as we build out that framework that will offer information to all of the adults in our system what learning will look like for the school year. And with that, I'll take questions if board members have any.
Thank you, Dr. Mary Perry Reed. Any questions or comments from my board colleagues? Thank you for leading us through a moment of silence at the beginning so we can recognize the weight of these tragedies, and also for the joyful updates from Hopkins. We need to be able to hold all of it at the same time. With that, I would look for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved?
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, I would look for a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Chair Bouchard?
Yes.
Before we approve the consent calendar, I wanted to draw to every board member's attention that there was a slight modification to the temporary modification of graduation requirements. This change came directly from our staff working with our students toward graduation, and it is to give everyone involved some flexibility. The prior resolution read that, I'm getting down to it, sorry, about the elective requirements, and an addition was made that says students can request the elective and additional course requirement waiver. We heard from counselors that they needed that flexibility in order to work directly with students. So just wanted everyone to know that when you're approving the consent calendar, you are approving that additional wording in the resolution.
Thank you for that clarification. So with that, I would look for a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, we'll move to our treasurer's report with Treasurer Adams.
Thank you, Chair Bouchard. We're 83% through the school year as of April 30th, and expenses are at 75% of budget. So we're running ahead of, we're doing well on budget, let's put it like that. It usually ends up catching up with us in June and July, but for now, we're doing well. Expenses of note this time, $106,000 for regular bus transportation for the first 2 weeks of April. We spent $500 for an author visit to a third grade class, not sure which school, but that was paid for with a HEF grant, so thanks to the Hopkins Education Foundation for that. We paid $109,000 for District 287 services for May. We continue to hand out numerous refunds for purchased lunches that were not consumed due to COVID-19, because all lunches were free during the pandemic and continue to be. We paid $38,500 for parking lot improvements at Meadowbrook, which I have not seen, but I need to go over and visit. Nearly $5,800 for the robotics team bus to and from the national competition in Houston. And it was, I'm sure, a big thrill for them to be able to attend those that national event. $1,100 for a mariachi band. Now, I don't know what school it was, but I suspect it had something to do with Cinco de Mayo, so I wish I could have heard him. And just as evidence of our ongoing commitment to nutrition, $16,352 for milk for the month of April. So with that, I move that we approve total disbursements in the amount of $2,442,289.19 for the period May 4, 2022 through May 17, 2022.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the treasurer's report. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you, Treasurer Adams.
Certainly.
Next, we'll move into new business. I'd like to welcome Director Fisher and Director Chauvin to the table. As they are joining us, I'll turn it over to Dr. Mary Perry Reed.
Thank you, Chair Bouchard. Our community education department offers an extremely wide array of programming, including early childhood, youth and adult enrichment, community engagement, adult basic education, interpreter and translations, and facility use. And under Director Fisher's leadership, community education also engaged in Vision 2031 aligned strategic mapping to plan out how community education might transform its services and programming over the next 10 years. So thankful to you, Director Fisher, for that leadership, and welcome to the table Sarah Chauvin, who is our Director of Early Childhood, and the two of them will give us an update on community education.
Thank you, Dr. Mary Perry Reed. Hi, Chair Bouchard. Hello, respective board members. Hello, community members. I'm excited to talk today about community education and the process we've gone through this year to more closely align with Vision 2031. Community education is at its core lifelong learning and enrichment. And as you think of community education, that's what I hope you remember. Elise? So, community education improves schools and communities by providing quality programs. That's really the purpose of community education, and we connect to learners of all ages, from infants to people who are well into their 80s and 90s. We have something for everyone of all ages and all abilities. And as Dr. Mary Perry Reed said earlier, community education consists of 5 main departments. We have preschool and ECFE, and these are approximate numbers of staff people, but I put them up there just to give you a sense of kind of the size of each program and to just kind of give you a better idea of what that looks like. But there's approximately 45 staff in preschool and ECFE. Our before and after school care program, that's Kids and Company, we have around 60 staff people. Our youth and adult enrichment programs, we have about 220 instructors in a year. So that can be anyone from some of the vendors we work with to teachers who are K-12 or E-12 teachers that teach enrichment programs in their free time, or it could be community members that want to teach a community ed class. And so that's who teaches youth and adult enrichment classes. Our adult academic and career readiness staff, that's adult options in education or adult basic education. We have about 25 staff people spread out between 3 school districts, Minnetonka, St. Louis Park, and Hopkins. And community use of district facilities. That's our field rental and our building rental, our conference rooms. We also have staff that work in that department, and there are about 30 staff people there. So this year was a really exciting year for us. We really underwent a lot of planning together, a lot of meeting time together, and a lot of thinking about how can we more closely align community education with Vision 2031. I think, when you think of community education, it is partnership focused, it is community based, it is, it's outside of the classroom, outside of the walls of the classroom. So in some ways, it already kind of comes packaged as Vision 2031 aligned. But there was a lot of internal work that we needed to do, and we did do this year. So I'm excited to share with you some of that work that we did. We worked with a consulting agency called Sherry Essen Consulting, and Sherry Essen was phenomenal, and she really helped us through this process. So some of the work we did as departments, and the way it worked is each department went through this work. So facilities use, early childhood, school age care, each department participated in these activities as well as kind of an overall community education activity as well. So everyone did the following work. We did SWOT analysis, stakeholder analyses, elevator speeches where we learned to talk about Vision 2031 in 30 seconds. So we kind of, built our vocabulary around it. We participated using the lab operating system to really try to tackle some of those issues that haven't gone away, that are just kind of built into the system. We looked at our department values and mission. We thought about where we wanted to be in 10 years. We each created 3-year pictures and 1-year plans. And we came up with quarterly plans that will help us to achieve our 1-year plan. We've devised success indicators, looked at our marketing strategies, and we've come up with some of those issues that we know we'll need to tackle eventually.
Can I ask quickly, what are SWOT analyses?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. I'm sorry. So SWOT analyses are strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So you look at an area and you figure out those 4, what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that you should be aware of in each of those areas.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to highlight for you some of our key partnerships this year. I'll talk about the partnerships that are bolded there, although what I've done is outlined kind of what I see as really the key people that we partner with that really help community education run smoothly and partner with all of our schools to help us be better. The first one is Alice Smith Elementary, which I'll talk about a little bit later on when I talk about enrichment, but Principal Navidad and community education partnered well this year to test out a new enrichment model that was really focused on the parents and the students at Alice Smith, and I'll tell you a little more about that later, but it went extremely well. the Cerisi Walburn Foundation awarded us a grant of $99,500 this year. And that money went to support our Royal Connections program. And they were generous enough to let us roll that money over to next year too. Because of the pandemic, we had to shut down for a couple months, and so they generously allowed us to use the same funding next year. We partnered with the Hennepin County Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Department to help us reimagine our SCIP Council. SCIP is Schools and Community in Partnership, so we have lots of partners in our community who come together to kind of give updates and highlights about things going on in their organizations. And so I'm working with Director Contreras and Holly Magdans to kind of redefine SCIP and think about how we want to run that council going forward. And so the Hennepin County Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Department has been really helpful to help us think about how we want to align ourselves and structure ourselves. The National Black MBA Association Twin Cities chapter has been really generous and phenomenal in sponsoring some of our events. They sponsored our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion mixer. We had like an event earlier in the fall, and they helped to sponsor that. And then when we had our Black Males Summit last week, they were also one of the sponsors that paid for transportation and food. So they've been just a really strong partner of ours. And Wayzata Community Education will be joining Adult Options next year. They'll be joining our consortium, and so we're excited about that new partnership as well. Next slide. Community engagement this year has taken on a lot of forms. We do virtual family engagement meetings that many of you have been a part of. We did a free parks program earlier in the year. Again, SCIP is a way we engage community members. We have community celebrations. We conducted a community needs analysis that really engaged many of our community members this year. We went door-to-door knocking. We sent out QR codes. We went to ESL classrooms, so we tried to engage as many people as possible. The Hopkins Royal Parent Academy is a grant that we received from HEF that will be a partnership with Gatewood Elementary and Alice Smith, where we work with parents to kind of help them navigate the K-12 schools or the E-12 school system. Sorry, Sarah. But this grant will allow us to work with parents, have food, have meetings, and a curriculum in 3 different languages, in English, Somali, and Spanish. We had intended to do that this year, but because of the pandemic, it spiked right when we were going to run the program. So that program will run in the fall of next school year. And Royal Connections, which employs high school students to take part in community events. So as Director Chapanduka mentioned earlier, the community ed financial picture is looking strong. It's doing much better than before, so I'll highlight a few areas. Community Education Fund 4 is split out into restricted funds. There's the General Community Ed Fund, which when revenue comes in from programs like Kids and Company or from facilities rentals, that money goes into the General Community Ed Fund, and it's not as restricted as the other fund areas, which are ECFE, school readiness, adult basic ed, preschool, and preschool screening. So you can see last year we lost $162,603 in our General Community Ed Fund, but this year, we are expected to have a revenue over expense of $230,505. Next year, that projects, we're hoping to bring in revenue of closer to $929,553 in the General Community Ed Fund. And as you go down the list, you can see the other funds and kind of how they project out to be. I'd like to point out our preschool screening fund right now, which is always a struggle because there are so many needs, and especially because of COVID, we weren't able to screen all the families that needed to be screened for preschool. So this year there was kind of like a bottleneck where we had to really get to all the families. And so there's a bit of a shortfall there. But that's the beauty of the general community ed fund, is it can cover those types of losses. So total revenue over expense this year, including all of the funds, we're hoping to have 405,543 in the positive, and next year that would project out to $925,459. So if you look at our fund balance, right now at the end of this year, we're projecting a fund balance of $1,339,323. And next year, at the end of next year, we would project a fund balance of $2,267,373.
Alex, Chair Bouchard, if I may,
Of course.
what accounts for the big jump in general community ed revenue that you're projecting?
A couple of things. One is we've really kind of restructured our leadership, how the people that kind of run the administration in community ed, we've restructured that a bit. And so we're trying to be much more efficient with kind of the amount of staff we have. When people retire, we look at can we combine positions, and so we've combined a number of positions. Just to give you an example, we used to have a kids and company accountant and a clerical person and a interpreter scheduler. Those are 3 different positions, and this year we're having one person do all 3 of those things. So we're just trying to combine areas, and we're looking more critically at some of the programming we're running, and we've had to cut back on some of the field trips that we used to do in kids and company that were actually quite expensive. We've had to scale back on that. So those are some of the little things that kind of add up to a lot in the end.
So it's not that you're seeing a whole bunch more participation, it's that you're keeping a better eye on the expenses?
I agree with that, yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, so goals and success metrics. This is thinking ahead to next year. So we want to increase staff capacity to use and understand data. I think traditionally community ed has been laissez-faire with data, and it's one of the most important things we can do, in community ed is to use data. We have a really great data. What is Carly's position? Data analyst. And so we're just really fortunate to have the data analyst and use her to help us use data to our advantage. We want to partner to build world-class workforce and development program, working with the cities of Minnetonka, Hopkins, and Golden Valley. We hope to really build a nice workforce development program. We want to provide individualized enrichment choices to scholars and families with local instructors at home school buildings. So that's a difference. In the past, we didn't really partner with our schools to provide targeted marketing to those school buildings. We just kind of blasted out enrichment to everybody, and if you wanted to sign up, you kind of have to know where to go and how to find it. One of our goals is to really partner more with each individual school to help reach families where they are. We want to build local loyalty and become a community destination. We used to rely heavily on vendors. Vendors are kind of like this packaged program that you contract with and they'll run your enrichment for you. One of the things we're really trying to do differently is find just people in our community and teachers in our schools that want to run enrichment programs and work with them. So that's more economical, and it's also more individualized because they know students better and they can offer a more tailored program to the students that they know. And increase registrations for anti-racist youth and adult enrichment classes. We really want to focus on anti-racist curriculum and increase our programming and registrations in that area as well. So I'm happy to hand it over now to Assistant Director Chauvin, who will talk a little more about Hopkins Preschool.
Good evening to everyone. Dr. Mary Perry Reed, I just want to say thank you for that moment of silence to acknowledge the unfathomable experiences that are happening across our nation, and I appreciate the time that you've taken to do that. Chair Bouchard and all members of the board, I'm happy to be here tonight. I'm here to talk a little bit about early childhood. It's thrilling to be able to tell you the things that are happening in our department. Just a few months ago, I was here talking about our new structure for preschool, where we are taking the half-day preschool program and the full-day preschool program and merging them into one, beginning with fall 2022. When I was last here with this presentation, I gave an overview. We are taking all the funding that's available, incorporating Child Care Assistance Program, which is CCAP, Think Small, which is a Hennepin County Assistance Program, and all the funding that comes through MDE for preschool. We're trying to braid those funding streams together so families have access to the number of hours of care that they would like in the location. We can then form a financial support to make sure they get what they're looking for, that high-quality preschool experience with the care and education through the course of the day that they need. When I was last year talking about it, we had just started registration. I'm so happy to report that registration is going really well. We've got families very interested. We're seeing that we've laid out information in a more clear way, and we feel like it's as successful as a first-year program can be. We're excited to start it in fall. Another thing I'd like to talk about is, oh, sure, I'll take a quick glass of water, sorry about that. I'd like to talk a little bit about how we're focusing on the core values of vigilant equity and authentic inclusivity in early childhood. Is that better? Yeah. We have just wrapped up a pilot in December focused on anti-racism and authentic inclusivity in early childhood. We had a cohort of 15 staff members across all early childhood programs really interested in beginning learning, reflection, and support of each other as we explored racial inequities, systemic racism that happened in our own American school system, and really dive deep into what's happening in early childhood. We spent a good amount of time reflecting and learning about bias. And at the end of the year-long pilot, we focused on action and change. So using what we knew and what we saw as issues in our own programs and roles, we focused on creating a change that we knew we would be impactful in classrooms or programs. At the end of at December, when we had our success meeting and we talked about all the different projects that were going on, we realized that we wanted to make sure we could keep this going. So a small core group across programs are working together to create another year-long program that will begin next year. Another cohort of staff will focus on learning through a micro-credential course. And I need to make sure I thank the Hopkins Education Foundation as they are supporting this program with classroom materials that are culturally relevant and welcoming for all of our students. I can talk about the partnerships that we have in early childhood. We've partnered with Relate Counseling this year. We're focusing on in-classroom strategies, coaching teachers on wellness strategies and environmental changes for students. we knew that this year we were going to need to focus on social emotional learning in a very deep way, even more so than we normally would in early childhood. So this Relate counselor is able to come into classrooms, talk about situations and scenarios, and work directly with the teacher so that that classroom environment becomes the space to support and create a secure space for students. We're also focusing on a partnership with St. David's, which Special Services actually is taking the lead on, but it's happening at Harley. We'll have one of the few autism day treatment centers partnered with school support as a full-day program for students. So students will come to our educational support system for half a day, and then within the same building, do day treatment for St. David's, which provides a full-day program for students, something that families often ask for, and it's very difficult to find. And as ever, I do apologize for my voice. I don't know why this happens, but I really feel like it's allergies. It just goes crazy, so I'm gonna make it.
You're doing great.
Thank you.
No need to apologize.
I'll get through it. I want to talk about the way that we've kept working to integrate E through 12 plus, and we're using the graduate traits in order to do that. We want our preschool students to really know and understand that as they walk into this classroom, they're laying a foundation for their graduation day. So we're taking the graduation traits and we're asking teachers to, during conference time, have a conversation with parents about which of those graduate traits they're already seeing in each and every student. This is a strengths-based conversation with parents, and it's a really valuable use of even conference time, because what we've learned from teachers who have done this as a pilot this year, parents are saying, oh yeah, I see this at home too. And we're creating a bridge on the strengths that are shared across those two spaces. We'll also be taking these narratives and sharing them with the kindergarten teachers during kindergarten transition, so there's a full understanding of what strengths and gifts we're seeing in each student as they transition from preschool to kindergarten. I just want to say thank you for your patience with me. I really do sometimes have to push myself through this. And again, I think it's just the allergies. They just catch me by the end of the day. But I am extraordinarily excited to tell you about early childhood, and I welcome any questions. And again, thanks for your patience.
Thank you. We've, as you mentioned, you were with us earlier this year and shared some of that preliminary work that had been done to create a more equitable and holistic early childhood experience for our community. And it's so exciting to see that we're at this point now. Of course, if we had a legislature that fully funded early childhood for every child in the state of Minnesota, we would not need to spend hundreds of hours figuring out how to braid together funding streams. And the fact that your team has done this work over the past year is really phenomenal. I'm hearing great feedback from community members, some of whom have moved into the district to be able to access early childhood, and of course, you know, keeping their kids in the district throughout their educational journey. So I'm so thrilled to have these opportunities. And I understand vocal fatigue and allergies, and so thank you, and your enthusiasm comes through, and we're so happy that you were able to be here tonight.
Thank you.
Chair Bouchard?
Yes.
I just want to make a quick mention that Sarah has also done a great job implementing the recommendations that came from that fall 2018 strategic task force, because one of those huge recommendations was to figure out how to blend programming and make and build a streamlined process for parents so their kiddos could experience a, what do you call it, a uniform program versus so many confusing options. So you've done a really great job following those recommendations.
Thank you.
So my colleagues are not here with me, but they did ask that I quickly go through some of the highlights of their program. So if you'll bear with me quickly, I'd like to just kind of go through some of these slides and share some of the highlights with you. Kids and Company, under the leadership of Jaleesa Smith-Breedlove, is really doing phenomenal things. She's taken her staff and kind of unified and brought them together in a very exciting way. They've looked at some values that they're focused on: community, curiosity, excellence, equity, and love. And they have some improvements ready for next year, including a tiered contract system so that families will be able to choose really how much they want to pay based on the time they pick up their child. They will be integrating youth enrichment more and using Kids and Company staff to help us develop that program. And there'll be new partnerships there. Also, if you're interested in the numbers, this school year, so far, we have 650 students enrolled, and this summer 2022, we'll have 473 students enrolled and 56 staff members working. And then youth enrichment, I mentioned the Royal Connections program. There's 40 instructors hired, trained, and they're serving E12 youth through tutoring, teacher assistant, and district events. And there's been a total of 89 assignments filled so far. Camp Royal, we have almost 1,800 registrations up to this point. And then you'll see underneath there, it says targeted services at Camp Royal. Targeted services programming is combined with Camp Royal, so there are some students who are there for targeted services, and there are some students who are there just for Camp Royal. They were not referred to Camp Royal, but to targeted services, but they're all together. And for targeted services, so far we have 2,764 registrations, which equals about 358 students, and 167 licensed teachers who will lead the camps. That Alice Smith Enrichment, that was the partnership we had with Principal Navidad this year. We had 145 registrations with scholarships and an improved instructor recruitment system. So really exciting. Next year, we're going to be doing that more with the other schools as well. Adult enrichment, 778 unique adult registrations in 2021, and this year that number has increased because of COVID is no longer as much of a threat as it was last year, so we have 952 unique users. That amounts to 2,386 adult registrations. Pickleball, as you may know, is huge. We have a huge following that play daily downstairs. We're increasing our offerings at Hopkins Center for the Arts, and so that partnership is just very strong, and we're going to continue to work with Hopkins Center for the Arts. They have beautiful facilities and classrooms, so we'll be offering more classes at Hopkins Center for the Arts next year. And this year, we did a series of classes about raising racially conscious kids, and that's a perfect example of the type of programming we want to continue going on into the future. Adult options in education, Chelsea's not here, but as a quick reminder, adult options is English classes, GED, college and career prep, career training, computer skills, and civics and citizenship. They have many different class models: hybrid, high flex, online, and in person. So far this year, they have 717 learners from 64 countries who speak 40 different languages. Their career pathway classes are focused on healthcare and education. So some examples of those classes are a medical terminology class, intro to healthcare careers, jobs in schools, and a parapro class. And that Parapro class is kind of a exciting partnership that we have with HR in Hopkins. We offer, as I mentioned, the paraprofessional prep class, which you can take. We do testing and interview and placement here. And if you take the Parapro class through Adult Options and you end up getting hired through Hopkins, then you get the cost of the class reimbursed. And then we do some on-site for employers too. So we have a partnership with Johnny Pops, the Popsicles, and also Park Nicollet, where we offer classes in their buildings where we teach their employees English. And as I mentioned, Wayzata Public Schools will be joining the Adult Options in Education Consortium next year, so we're excited to have them join the consortium. District facility use is up this year. We have the highest usage hours since 2016. We sent out surveys and we had a 97% customer satisfaction feedback, which is the high, and we have had the highest revenue total since 2016. So that's all we have. I really appreciate your listening and your patience. It's always fun for us to be able to present to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for all the exciting updates. It certainly has been a busy year in community ed, and wondering if my board colleagues have any comments or questions.
Chair Bouchard?
Yes.
Just a quick question. This is one of my favorite times, learning about community ed. And so just thank you for the time. Thank you for all the work you're doing for our community. I know often when I'm speaking to people in the community, they say, I don't have a kid in school. And I say, well, you could be in school, community ed. It's a really vital service. It keeps so many of us connected to learning and growing and each other. So just very thankful. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Chair Bouchard.
Yes.
In the board packet, you included a written report, and you referenced a survey that was done by Morris Leatherman, I think, several years ago. And I remember hearing the outcome of that survey, and it's just really impressive how supportive people who take advantage of community education are very supportive of the schools. And that's been, I think, our strength for years. They vote overwhelmingly positively for referenda that we might have. So community ed, besides fostering personal growth, does provide some great opportunities for the school district in return. So keep doing the good job.
Wholeheartedly agree. Thank you.
Yeah.
Chair Bouchard?
Yes.
It's amazing how much has changed in the 2 years that I've been on the board, and I was so glad to see the numbers in Kids & Co., and I know that was a struggle throughout the pandemic. And I'm a little sad that my kids aren't Kids & Co. age anymore, but I'm so glad to see the health of that program, and as also a Hopkins preschool family that went through that, like I just look at those numbers and I feel like so excited to see the new programs that are coming out. I mean, we loved Stepping Stones, but to see that combining and having it be one Hopkins preschool now, I just think about the things that are changing to make these programs suit our families. And I love that we're taking, an anti-racist and equitable approach, even in those preschool years. I just think it's so great. I'm a little bit sad that my kids are too old to be in Kids & Co. now, but thank you, guys.
We will be partnering with the Royal Connections program. So as we are recruiting high school students to come into our preschool classes, you can kind of keep that in the back of your mind. There's always a way to re-enter into early childhood. We'd love to have them.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. The board does not need to take action on this report. This was just a delightful update and an opportunity for us to learn about what's happening in community ed. And thank you for your continued efforts to move us closer to Vision 2031.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And please pass the thanks on to your team.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on to our next new business item, which is our long-term facilities maintenance update. We'd like to invite the team up to the table, and while they are joining us, I'll turn it over to Dr. Mary Perry Reed.
Thank you, Chair Bouchard. So we do have a larger team approaching the board table to help us better understand our long-term facilities maintenance plan. And as you know, our district, with help from the Business Services Office, is required to update the long-term facilities maintenance plan, which we usually refer to as LTFM, and we update this plan annually. So Director Chapanduka, our Director of Business Services, along with Kevin Newman, Supervisor of Business Buildings and Grounds, which is in the business office. And we also have our partners from Ellers and SiteLogic. So we'll allow our colleagues and friends to introduce themselves, and thank you for your report this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Mary Perry. Again, good evening, Chair Bouchard. Good evening, respective board members. So what we have here is an update, as the superintendent mentioned, that we are required to actually have an annual plan, which we'll file with Minnesota Department of Education, the Commission of Education. And what we have here today is a presentation of our 10-year plan, with the hope that the board will actually approve the resolution at our June 7 meeting, together with our intermediate District 287 long-term facility management plan. With me, I have Mr. Kevin Newman, our Supervisor of Buildings and Grounds, who will introduce our friends and partners from Ellers and SiteLogic, and then we'll go into the presentation, and the board can ask some questions after the presentation. To you, Kevin.
Thank you. Greetings, board. To my right is Shelby McQuay. She is a public finance advisor from Ehlers. She's also a managing director for the firm.
Good evening.
And then to my left is Jake Berg. He is senior program executive for SiteLogic, who helps administer our LTFM program. Thank you, Jake.
Good evening, board.
Welcome.
Okay, that said, I'll actually give Jake the mic, and he can go ahead and take us through the 10-year plan. And after that, Shelby will take over and give us some pointers on our debt structure.
All right, thank you. On behalf of SiteLogic, I just want to thank you all for the opportunity to continue to serve as your long-term facilities maintenance planning partner. It's a privilege to work for the district, and I know I'm a new face with SiteLogic here tonight, but I'm really looking forward to working with you all. So, next slide, please. I wanted to start by kind of revisiting some of the past phases. So what you'll see in front of you now is a depiction of really starting in 2005 and the great work that the district has done. You really should be commended for the investments you've made in your facilities over the past 18 years. Walking around the district, it really shows in the quality of the learning environments. Another thing to note is, again, this is long-term facilities maintenance planning, so from time to time, it's prudent to take a step back and really revisit things, reassess things. SiteLogic did that this year in cooperation with the district. So over the past 6 months or more, our team of engineers, facility analysts, you may have seen some of them walking around your buildings. We've been assessing your infrastructure, really looking comprehensively, a 16-category assessment from, we like to say, blacktop to rooftop in your buildings. The result of that was a system report card, kind of the health of your buildings, that we cataloged and compiled. A lot of great data that Torero and Kevin will have now at their disposal to help manage their facilities going forward. As a result of that report, We looked at some new things that were identified. We worked over the last several months with Kevin to look at those new identified items, prioritize those based on where he felt they should fall within the 10-year planning cycle, and incorporate them into the new plan. Next slide, please. The next slide we'll go over is an estimate of the next phase, estimated project costs. So you'll see two graphs there, kind of the phases depicted both by fiscal year as well as by calendar year. So the total is roughly 32 million in each scenario. Again, the way the state MDE looks at the planning phases is by calendar year, but we also separate it out into fiscal year. So that's where you'll see the difference in the numbers there in a few charts we have. Next slide, please. Here is a breakdown of the 10-year plan by building, and this is categorized by fiscal year. So you can see kind of in each year where the investments are being made into which building. You'll notice in the bottom right that the number totaling up over that 10-year plan has likely grown in size from previous year's versions that you have seen. That is due to two main factors. The first one being, again, we took a step back and looked and reassessed everything, so there were a few new things that were identified. This is normal when you look at facility infrastructure. Just like your car, it has a certain expected life, so when you reanalyze it, there are new priorities that are identified. So that's part one. Part two to why that number has increased, we all hear the news about supply chain issues and inflation. We had to update a lot of the previous budget estimates that were in the plan based on the new market conditions. So based on our construction history and quotes within the area, we applied escalations to items so that when those projects do eventually go out to bid, that those are accurate bids you're taking out. Next slide, please. The next slide you'll see here is the 10-year plan, and this is depicted by LTFM category. So the Minnesota Department of Education utilizes specific codes for each project and each building category. The health and safety, indoor air quality projects are divided into kind of two buckets at the top. Those that are greater than 100,000 are listed in the top line item, and those that are less than are listed below that. Below, you can see an additional breakout of where some of those dollars are being spent in terms of categories and systems within your building. Things like building envelopes, so there we're talking about doors, windows, roofs, really sealing up the integrity of the building. Mechanical systems, electrical, plumbing. Again, this is how the projects are categorized and where those investments are being made over the 10-year plan. And here is another depiction of the 10-year plan, and this is by calendar year, by building, so you can see a little bit more clearly rather than fiscal year where those investments are being made by calendar year. And here I'll turn it over to Shelley from Ellers.
So as you recall, what we typically do is take the expenditure plan and then build it into your overall capital plan to make sure that we're representing the tax rate usually neutral to the prior year on your overall capital plan. So fitting all these expenditures in tax neutral to the extent possible. You are a grandfathered district for the LTFM program, which means that you are not limited to $380 per pupil of spending on LTFM. Instead, as one of the 27 grandfathered districts, you can have your expenditures approved by the MDE, and then you can allocate that the revenue to pay for those expenditures through a combination of bonding and pay-as-you-go. And so that is what we're doing with those expenditures, is fitting that into your overall capital plan to make sure, in this case, to make sure it stays tax neutral with the prior year. So where we kind of left off on your previous expenditure plan prior to SiteLogic doing those updates is on the next slide. And you might recall we did the last bonding. You're usually on an every other year bonding cycle. And so the last bond was in taxes, at the end of 2022. But each year we reflect on that capital plan and make sure that it fits in still given your updated tax-based numbers and any other changes that you might need in your overall capital plan. So that's where we ended off in taxes payable 2022, and that is what is reflected on the levy and then on the taxes for your constituents and your tax base. This represents about $87 million of expenditures over the fiscal years 23 through 32. It also incorporates the final values for taxes, the preliminary values for taxes payable 2022 and 6 future bond issues. The oriented there is your existing debt is the gray bars. Your capital project levy, which is incorporated in your overall capital plan, though it's an annual levy, it's included here, is the orange bars. The blue bars is that pay-as-you-go portion of the LTFM revenue, and then the top bar, the blue slash bars, is the LTFM bonding. So it's nice to keep a mix of pay-as-you-go and bonding and the benefits. There are benefits to each. Pay-as-you-go, of course, you're not incurring any interest costs, and you do have a little more control over setting your levy by moving that pay-as-you-go one way or another. The benefits of bonding for the program are that MDE does not allow you to carry over any of your pay-as-you-go, so you need to spend that every fiscal year, and of course, with the construction season falling, or I should say the fiscal year falling right in the middle of the construction season, it's very difficult to manage when those exact costs come in, which is where those bonding dollars can help Kevin and Truro especially moderate and make sure that there's no major adjustments to the levy in a future year. So then on the next slide, you can see we built in the updated estimates from SiteLogic. The expenditures now are approximately $177 million over that same 10 years, fiscal year 23 and through fiscal year 2032. And you can see we were able to keep that tax neutral over relative to the prior year in your overall capital plan. Just comparing the two slides, you can see that a lot of the capacity and the drop downs that were included in the prior plan are now taken up with that additional spending. The blue bars too are also increased a little, so a little more in bonding and a little more in pay-as-you-go. Your constituents are not unlike the rest of the state, and we're all experiencing significant increases in our assessed values, and that will carry over to an overall tax base that you have that's a lot that has a lot more growth than especially the prior year. In taxes payable 22, the overall growth was less than you'd seen on average over the past several years, but the assessments for taxes payable 23 are coming in a lot higher, and the average growth that we're anticipating for net tax capacity is a lot greater than certainly last year and greater than on average. So home values are ranging anywhere, those increases from about 15 to 20% increases. Commercial industrial, though, is not seeing a similar increase. For the Minnetonka portion of a lot of the commercial property is in the Minnetonka, the city of Minnetonka, and they're experiencing about a 2% growth in commercial industrial. Hopkins a little bit more at about 7% growth, according to the Hennepin County assessment. So taking that all into consideration, we do think that your community will experience some growth, and you're able to keep that then tax neutral with the prior year based on your overall capital plan. So I think what we also should note here is that even though there's growth in or increases in the overall project expenditures that are incorporated here, interest rates are also increasing, and I have a depiction of that on the next slide, going back 20 years to show just the average interest rates. So school districts are tax exempt and you can issue tax exempt debt. So this just depicts the 20-year trend in tax exempt debt going back, and lots of volatility, that we like to just incorporate when we're estimating out future bond issues, but also just demonstrating that we are still on average below what we've seen for the last 20 years. So.
Thank you, Shelby. Thank you, Jake. One thing I'll probably just add, so this is just on the long-term facility maintenance. I just want to make sure that we are clear that if we decide to go ahead and maybe alter our facilities or make additional spaces in our facilities, that will require a new request of funding from our taxpayers, which may add to the presentation which has been provided here by Ehlers and SiteLogic, which may actually kind of have some impact on our taxpayers. To what level, I don't know. It depends with like how much bonding we'll be doing if we decide to go for a referendum.
Thank you very much. This is really helpful, both for the board and our community to understand the plan over time and have that historical context, and then a holistic picture of what we can expect moving forward. So really appreciate you all being here tonight. Wondering if my board colleagues have any comments or questions for this team.
Chair Bouchard.
Director Adams.
I'm just wondering if Shelby could come to our taxpayer information session in December and reassure our constituents, our taxpayers, that we're doing the right thing. Because they're all concerned about rising property values. And I tell them, isn't that great that your property value is going up? But they don't always see it that way. So, thank you for this comprehensive analysis. It's very, very useful looking at where we might go in the future. Thank you.
We can save you the time. We'll just play the recording of what you said tonight.
Then I should qualify that and say this is the capital plan that's tax neutral.
Yeah,
Yes.
tax neutral, tax neutral.
And, as property values increase, if everybody's property value increases at the same level that, and we're all fitting in, especially for school districts, that does not necessarily mean a whole bunch of new revenue for school districts. So if everybody's value is increasing at the same rate, then it's just the same amount of money spread on a larger tax base. So, yeah, lots of intricacies that can happen there.
Thank you. Anything else from the board? Thank you very much for being here this evening. Appreciate it. Appreciated the report. No board action required on this. So Dr. Mary Perry-Reed, did you have some concluding thoughts?
Just a word of thanks. Thanks to all of you for the very detailed report and for all of you for being here tonight. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Excellent. Thank you. We'll invite Director Chapman-Duca to stay at the table, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Mary Perry-Reed for our last new business item, which is our fiscal year 2022-23 budget presentation.
Well, thank you, Chair Bouchard. So we did have Truro provide information regarding this budget update during the workshop earlier. And so what we shared is that we wanted to re-highlight some information that has previously been shared with the board, as well as provide any changes that have occurred in the last few weeks as we prepare for the board's acceptance of the fiscal year 23 budget. And then we also made a mention that although we do have a healthy district budget, as education leaders and board members across the state, we are disappointed with the lack of support coming from the state legislature, which could be especially helpful with special education cross subsidies. So perhaps there will be a change with that in the next couple of weeks, but to be determined. And until then, we just want to make sure that our board members and community members are well informed about the Hopkins district budget. So thanks, Director Chapaduca, for being here again at the table.
Thank you, Superintendent Dr. Mary-Perry. Again, good evening, Chair Bouchard. Good evening, respective board members, colleagues, and the community. So this is a continuation of the presentation which we did on April the 19th when we presented the preliminary budget. Between that time and now, some of the numbers have changed due to a number of factors. Part of those factors include some of the additional funding we received from the state to cover some of our summer programs. So I've incorporated that into the presentation. So if you see the numbers differing from what was presented previously, it's just because, the pieces are moving so quick and fast. And with that comes the necessary changes, which we definitely appreciate getting new funding sources. Just as alluded by the superintendent, that we are in a healthy space, but our situation is also very fluid. Just knowing that we do have specific certain areas within our system which are not funded adequately, and there's more need in identifying and creating unique, innovative programs to address some of challenges we are seeing with mental health, some of the challenges we are seeing with additional outbreaks of the pandemic. So I'll probably start with where we actually started way back in October and moving forward into February, when our Citizens Financial Advisory Committee came to the board and gave the board the recommendations of what the budget would look like, considering all the factors we know with inflation and some of the economic indicators which we don't have control over. So initially, when we started to build the budget, we did have some priorities and objectives which were actually identified by our leadership, our staff, and some of our key stakeholders within the process. We did send out a matrix which we gave different options based on feedback we're receiving from the stakeholders, and out of there we created a scoring rubric which we used to identify some key priorities which we had to incorporate into fiscal year 23 budget. And all these factors were actually supported and identified based on our Vision 2031 goals. Part of those goals were identified by the board. Part of those goals were superintendent's goals. Part of the goals were system goals based on different leaders within our system, but everything was basically kind of embedded. And from an instructional perspective, there were three key factors which were identified by stakeholders, including restorative practice and wellness, training adults for change, personalized learning. We also were able to identify other factors which were on the operational side of things, mostly related to how we use data as the key driver of making decisions for the district, and this is the direction the district is taking. So we did incorporate all those factors into creating the budget we'll be presenting here tonight. Some of the things we've been working on is just on the decision-making process and just making sure that our leaders have the ability and the capability to be making decisions at the local level, which are actually aligned with district strategic goals. One of the other areas we've also been looking at is making sure that the budget is a moral document, it's transparent. We are being consultative when we make all these decisions. They are not made just at the central office. It's encompassing communication with our key stakeholders, as well as that our community understands the different parts to our budgets. I mean, there's work to be done, and we are working on making sure that, as we go into the future, there's better communication, there's better alignment with our community. We are also working on making sure that the programs which are being supported by the resources being channeled into our buildings are linked to the outcomes and the results are delivered through the innovative learning programs. So those are some of the allocation priorities and objectives we did focus on when we're building the fiscal year 23 budget. So for fiscal year 22-23, based on recommendations which were brought to the board by the Citizens Financial Advisory Committee, we did look at our predictable staffing model, version 1.0. We did refine that. We did take a look at some of the ratios, refine those ratios to make sure that they are addressing some of the challenges we foresaw when we're looking at our current budget, as well as some of the feedback we got from our different key stakeholders. We also factored in a 2% revenue increase based on what information we'd received from MDE. So for fiscal year 23, our basic per student allocation is $6,863, moving up from $6,728 in fiscal year 22. As you know, when we did the fiscal year 22 budget, we budgeted at a flat rate because at that point in time we didn't know that we're going to get any inflationary increases. We ended up getting the inflationary increases from MDE with a 2.45% increase in fiscal year 22 and a 2.0% increase in fiscal year 23. So those have been factored into the budget. Some of the components we also have factored in include a 3% cost of living adjustment, a 3% inflationary increase for fringe benefits, a 7% increase for purchase services and supplies, a 5% increase for utilities and energy. And as I mentioned during our workshop, that some of these increases, when you start to look at current and updated inflation, consumer price index inflation, you can start to see that some of those increases have already gone up. So currently when I look today, based on the April report, the inflationary increases have already gone up by 8.3% when you start to look at things like, some of our household goods and components, increases of 30 to 4% on utilities and energy, increases of 25% on some of our food services. So we'll continue monitoring just to make sure that, we don't end up in a deficit situation. Some of the factors we also included with the budget relates to flexible resources we are allocating into the buildings, which are used by building leaders at their discretion based on the needs and priorities for their buildings. So these include some of our categorical funding, compensatory revenue, This also includes some of our flexible basic per student calculations we have provided to buildings, which are flexible to be used based on different needs as long as they are aligned to our strategic goals. We also have supplies, some of the instructional site materials which are managed by buildings, which sometimes in the past have been managed at central office, but now the buildings do have the discretion of dollars we've allocated them to be used to address different needs, which may be unique if you move from one building to another. We also factored into the budget some of the ESSA allocations. So our last pot of money, based on what we have received from the government, is our ESSA 3. So there was a component of ESSA $3, which we have allocated and distributed across our system, mostly into the buildings, to address some of the learning losses as defined by Minnesota Department of Education. So those factors have been incorporated into the budget. As you know, our revenue is driven by enrollment. So one of the key factors we start to look at when we start allocating resources is to look at our enrollment district-wide, and then we granulate it into our buildings. And, you know, as you know, when the pandemic hit, we started experiencing loss in enrollment. We started to see some shift in the last year where enrollment is slightly gone up, mostly with increases in our kindergarten. And I know in talking to some of our Metro colleagues, they also have seen some spikes, mostly in the West Metro, some spike in their kindergarten. Same situation is happening with Hopkins Public Schools. But overall, when you start to look on the long range, you can see that our enrollment is flat. I mean, it's not declining. It's going to be flat for the next few years. We are hoping that with some of our innovative programs we are starting, for example, with our virtual education, we might end up capturing more students into the district to at least mitigate on some of the resources we have invested into those innovative programs. So that being said, we pull our enrollment. That's when we start to calculate what revenue looks like for the district, putting into consideration the different categories of revenue and funding we receive for the district. So if you can go to the next slide, Alice. So I'll start with from the overall total funding which comes into the district. General fund, which is our main operating fund, carries the majority of the revenue coming into the district. So 69%, which is about $130 million, is actually generated through the general fund. 3%, about $4.1 million, is generated through our food services, which is a proprietary program which generates revenue based on, you know, the food services we provide for our scholars. We had Mr. Fisher was presenting on the community education program, so about 6% of our total budget, which is about $9.3 million, comes again from a proprietary fund, which is the community education, which is fee generated. 16.2 or 10% is our debt service, which is part of what our colleagues from ELAS were kind of explaining to us. And the debt services are lumped together with our levy. 13% or $21.1 million based on what was presented to the board tonight, which will go back and, you know, refine, but currently about $21.1 million is the construction through the long-term facility maintenance, which brings our total revenue to the district of $163.9 million. Like I mentioned, our general fund, which is 69%, actually has different streams of buckets of money which are coming into the district. The majority of this revenue is calculated at the state level through specific formulas, which are either tied to the application for benefits or they are tied to some other factors which are determined by the state. So we have compensatory aid, we have achievement and integration, we have English learners, we have gifted and talented, we have special education. Again, with special education, we receive a portion of the funding into the district and we have to cross-subsidize those funds with our general education aid. And that's a challenge because putting into consideration what we have right now, about 65% of the special education revenue is directly coming from the state, and the district has to cross-subsidize about 35% of that. It has slightly gone down in the past. It used to be about 60-40, so there's been some hold harmless revenue we have received in the past year, which has kind of slightly shifted things, but there's definitely a huge need for state to increase funding if we are going to maintain the levels required for maintenance of effort. We also receive revenue for extended learning. We receive revenue for state and local grants, federal programs. In the last 2 years, due to the pandemic, we have received additional funding, which will be drying out after the fiscal year 23, unless the government make different changes and plans. We also do receive revenue for career and technical education, Safe Schools levy. So all these different funding streams are all lumped in with the total allocations going into our buildings. Just like I said, some of the streams are tied to certain guidance from the state, so we can use those dollars for specific needs. We can't just shift them. So those are some of the challenges we find as we start to allocate resources into our system. Having said that, so when I start to break down all these different streams of revenue, our operating referendum, which is voter approved, brings in about $13.8 million or 12.3%. $5.8 million or 5.1% is through location equity, which is board approved. 11.6 or 10.3% of the revenue is through capital projects levy, which was approved by the voters. And the last approval was the vote, which was done in November of 2017. 1.2% of our revenue is integration aid, which translates to about $1.3 million. 2.7% or $3 million is our compensatory aid, which is driven by the application for benefits, which is the free and reduced lunches. 0.4% or $396,000 is our English learners. 8.5% or $9.6 million is our special education. Just like I said, special education is a cross-subsidy at the state general aid. We cross-subsidized by about $5 million. 5.9% or $6.6 million is our federal grants, which include the different title flavors as well as some of the ESSA funds. 0.4% or $409,000 is extended time. The remaining is non-categorical dollars, which is about 53.2% or 60.1%, which is the most flexible of the resources we have to address different needs in our priorities in our system, to give us a total of $113,042,523. On the expenditure side, 58% of our expenses are people, so salaries and wages, which amounts to a little over $65 million. 23% or $26 million are benefits. So if you add the two, about 81 to 82% of our total general fund over expenditures to support the personnel in our system. 13% or $15.1 million is purchase services. This includes some of our contracted services, for example, with our bus contract is all lumped in there. 2.9 million or 3% covers supplies. 1.5 million or 1% cover other expenditures, which may be miscellaneous, which are not categorized based on the Uniform Financial Reporting Standards. 2.2 million or 2% covers capital expenditures for a total of $130,042,523. So that being said, what we are presenting here is a budget which is structurally balanced with our general fund revenue of $130,042,523 and our projected general fund expenditures of $130,042,523. Just like I said, there's different changes which are happening across with information coming from the state, with the state wanting to spend some of the remaining ESSA dollars. So if any changes come to the district in the next couple of weeks, some of these numbers may be changing too. But at this point in time, what we are presenting is what we have based on the information we have from the state. So for context purpose, we went ahead and broke down our general fund allocations so that we can determine what allocations are going directly into our schools, what allocations are being allocated to the departments to support our different programs, and what allocations are district-wide. So the breakdown shows that 67% of our allocations are going directly into our buildings, meaning like that's $75.3 million of our total 113 million general fund allocations are going directly into our buildings. 6% or $6.7 million are going into our departments. So we have departments like human resources, departments like business services with payroll, our accounts receivable, accounts payable, our governance and management, which covers the board and the superintendent and some of our graduation expenses. We have our innovative design learning, which covers some of our teaching and learning. So those amounting to the 6% department allocations. The remaining 27%, those are resources which are managed at central office but are going direct into our buildings. So when you start to look at transportation, when you start to look at operations and maintenance, our custodians, our utility services, when you start to look at some of our district-wide initiatives with insurance payments, with our other post-employment benefits and severances, with our workers' compensation, those are managed at the district-wide. So if you add those pieces together, about 94% of district total resources are directly impacting and going into our classrooms. The next budget component is food services. So with food services, as you know that currently in the last 2 years we've been operating using the summer food service program, which was a full 100% claim back for participation in that program. Our projected revenue is sitting at $4,126,378. Our projected expenditures are sitting at $4,113,384, which leaves us with a surplus of about $12,994. We are still waiting to hear back from MDE on what food services reimbursement claims will look like for fiscal year 23, whether we still keep with the current summer food service program or whether we go back to the National School Lunch Program. Once we get more information from there, that may lead us to maybe make some adjustments on our numbers, depending with what that participation looks like. So we may come back later on to the board with updated information once we get more clarification on that. On community education, I know Director Fisher did present a lot of the information and what has happened within that program. And as he mentioned that initially when the pandemic hit, we did have faced some challenges with community ed, but things have stabilized to where the program is able to sustain itself into the future, thanks to his team and and the work they've put into stabilizing this fund. What I have for community education revenue, $9,360,254. Projected expenditures of $8,434,795, leaving us with a surplus of $925,459 for fiscal year 23, and adding, the fund balance, so that will take us to a little over $2 million. The other consideration, is we are very fluid at this point in time when we start to look at, different economic ramifications and some of the uncertainty in our economy. One, looking at, the injection of funds which we received through CARES and ESSA dollars. Those funds are dwindling, so there is a potential that beyond fiscal year 23, we won't be able to get any additional funds. So this will just have to put us in a position where we are conservative in how we are using our resources, just because those funds won't be available to at least mitigate some of the challenges we've faced in the last 2 years. And that may mean some reductions, and that may mean some, pivoting into looking at different innovative way of kind of keeping some of our programs. Student enrollment is stable, but to remain flat for the foreseeable future. As you all know, the legislature still has things hanging, so beyond fiscal year 23, we don't know what our budget will look like. We don't know if we'll have any increases coming our way. If we do, we'll bring that information back to the board. We are still up in the air with inflation, so there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of unknowns when it comes to inflation and what that looks like. We've budgeted conservatively. We also know that the actual forces out there are showing increases in our consumer price index. So these are things we'll keep monitoring, bring back to the board if any adjustments need to be made. With that, I would take any questions from the board. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Chapanduka. We had a great conversation with you during the workshop and really appreciate you sharing this information with our community as we move closer to approving that budget we anticipate on June 7th. So really appreciate your time. Of course, not just tonight, but all of the work you and your team have done to bring us yet another structurally balanced budget. Wondering if my board colleagues have any additional questions or comments for Director Chapanduka.
No questions, but I have a comment. I've spent the last weekend watching the proceedings over at the state capitol, and it was very disappointing. As your one bullet said on your second to last slide, the biennium budget settlement is unknown beyond fiscal year '23. Our legislature had a real opportunity this year with a huge surplus that we've got in the state to finally make things right for education, and they failed. And I don't foresee that there's going to be a special session. I just don't think the parties are all going to agree to that. So it puts a special emphasis on who we elect this fall and if they are going to be supportive of public education. And then beyond that, it puts a special emphasis on the next legislative session starting next January. So I would just urge anyone watching to pay attention to those things and support candidates that will support public education. I think it's really critical. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Adams. Agreed. Other comments or questions for Director Chapanduka? With that, I would look for, did I hear somebody? Sorry, it must have been my own echo. Okay, with that, I would look for a motion that the board adopt the proposed fiscal year 2022-2023 budget.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second that the board adopt the proposed fiscal year 2022-2023 budget. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you, Director Chapanduka.
Thank you.
Thank you, Turo.
Next, we'll move to our board member reports. Who would like to go first?
Go ahead.
All right.
Are we going to
Vice Chair Andreessen, let's do it.
I usually rely on Steve to go first, so then I know what not to mention, since so many of the things we do overlap.
Yeah.
But I will just quickly, because it is getting late, give an update to the board about a conference I attended last week on Tuesday, May 17th. It was the Student-Centered Equity Conference, which our lovely student board reps and Katie Peterson did a presentation at last year, and I attended as an attendee this year. It was a great conference. They offered it in a hybrid version, so you could go in person at the Science Museum in St. Paul or attend virtually. I attended virtually. It started off with an opening plenary with students from across the state, talking about their educational experience and what they want it to be. And then it broke out into separate small breakout sessions. And I chose to attend the first one, embedding equity and state policy design for student-centered learning. And then went to another breakout session around intensive grow your own programs. And the conference was organized really well. They sent out little packets to us virtual attendees, and you got to fill out a card with the charge that you left the conference with. And mine was something that came from one of the student speakers who said, trust students. So that is my charge. And then one of my key takeaways was that someone asked the question, will education transform fast enough to save the human species?
Wow.
So it's something that students are thinking and talking about. And that students learn from watching adults. They need your validation and support. And then we were supposed to have some action steps. And coming from the 2 breakout sessions that I do, there was a really great resource. The Aurora Institute and the Southern Education Foundation have models for state policies and bills, and also have built out advocacy plans and reports that spell out best steps forward. And one of the things that was shared was that we as adults need to be the connective tissue between students and their legislators. The other thing that came out as a great action step would be to visit with the high school for the recording arts. They developed an intensive Grow Your Own program that offers full funding for and a cohort model for their students that are pursuing education as a field of study, and they've entered into partnership with St. Cloud State. So I thought that would be a great example and model for Hopkins to look into, because I know that's a interest of ours. And then it ended with a plenary of adults who do education deeply across the state, and we were left with a really great thing that has stuck with me from Lakota Elder Dave Archambault. He was sharing about the power of creation stories, which every culture and every individual person has. And he said that the creation story is who you are and why you are. There is a sacred force in every human being, and it needs to be nurtured. All of us have instructions within us. Pulling that out of students is our job.
Powerful, thank you. Director Adams.
Yes, I'll be glad to report.
Great.
The day after our last board meeting, Rhoda and Rachel and I met with the Minnetonka mayor and the Hopkins and Golden Valley city managers in our quarterly meeting, and met the new Golden Valley Police Chief, Virgil Green, who was most recently police chief in Oklahoma City. So he's undergoing some culture shock right now, I'm sure, but in weather shock. But seems like a very wonderful guy and competent, and I wish him well in his new role. This is a time of year I really enjoy attending events, and this last week was no exception. We had the Avid celebration at the high school. Director Andreessen was there with me, as well as on scholarship night the following night. So got to attend those two. Over $40,000 in college scholarships were handed out on scholarship night. And I was very impressed by the caliber of the colleges that our Avid students are attending, but all of our students in general. Just really impressive. And Director Andreessen and I attended the retirement celebration for Sandy Lewandowski, who's the superintendent for District 287, and has been a very outspoken and competent spokesperson on behalf of special education in Minnesota for years. So we wish her well in her retirement. And then the last weekend, I spent getting frustrated watching the legislature in action. Attended via Zoom an Education Finance Conference Committee hearing on the 21st, whatever day that was, and nothing came of it. They kept deferring the time and ultimately just stopped meeting. So that was very frustrating. And that was reflected this morning in the MSBA chat that I attended via Zoom also, that, school districts across the state are all hurting, having to go through layoffs, are underfunded, to a chronic degree. and yet the legislature refuses to step up and do anything about it. So it makes this fall's election even more important. And I would be remiss if I didn't recognize the passing of a longtime employee of the Hopkins School District. Ernie Bunkowski was in the maintenance department for buildings and grounds for many, many years, decades. And when he retired, he was the head custodian at the high school. And he was also a graduate of Hopkins High School. So that was, it kind of came full circle. But when my wife was in the media center up at the high school, she would always do the New York Times crossword in the morning. And so would Ernie. And Ernie would come in, and if they were hung up on a certain item on the crossword, they'd confer on that. And it was a really gratifying experience for her to have someone in the building that she could confer with on crosswords, and that was Ernie. So our sympathies go out to his family and his friends on his passing.
Thank you, Director Adams. Any other board member reports?
Director Andreessen, did you want to speak to the listening session that we did?
No,
We
I
all
would
know
like
that Director
you
Peterson
to
doesn't give
speak
reports.
to it, please, Director Peterson.
Go for it, Director Peterson.
I appreciate you leading it.
So Vice Chair Andreessen and I, along with Dr. Mary Perry Reed and Dr. Lightfoot, hosted the community listening session, which was, I would say, a bit more of like a community submit and then listen to us session. So we may need to like reword that a little. But we did, get some good questions, and I think that there's going to be a lot of attention around the implementation of the policy. I mean, I would say that most of the questions were what it's going to look like in practice on a daily basis, more so than any concerns. We did have a little bit of concern around what that curriculum was, obviously as a hot button issue nationally, so we were able to really push back on some of those misconceptions around what an anti-racist curriculum will look like. But overall, I would say it was a pretty positive experience. I would say, like, in the future, I would like our listening sessions to be more interactive. I feel like it adds an element of transparency that maybe we didn't have as much. So just moving forward, I think, like, if we do another one, I would like it that way, I think. Although it was very fun to have Vice Chair Andreessen and I answering each other's questions. But yeah, I think overall it went really well. So
Great. Thank you for hosting that. Excellent. Okay, well, with that, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
second?
I have a motion and a second to adjourn. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. This meeting of the Hopkins School Board is adjourned at 9:03 PM. Thank you all so much.